Hi, and welcome to this week's edition of Newsmakers TV with analysis and commentary from Santa Barbara's top journalists on the air since 2014 as the Santa Barbara's most popular and provocative local news program. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Friday, June 9th, 2023, and I'm very pleased to welcome today's panel, Callie Fausey, who covers education for the Santa Barbara Independent, Lily Dallow, Digital Content Director for KEYT News, Ryan P. Cruz, not to be confused with Ryan Q. Cruz, staff writer for The Independent, and Josh Molina, politics and public policy reporter for Newshawk and purveyor of Santa Barbara Talks, the most influential podcast on the local scene. Josh, you see what I did there with the alliteration. Most popular except for this one. Anyway, thank you all for being here.
Hey, Jerry, you're not provocative until you get canceled by YouTube, but
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, good point. All right, lots to talk about this week. Conflict over the city budget at City Hall, the culture wars emerged before the school board, and what would newsmakers be without a week packed with housing disputes? But given that it's less than a month before Shark Week 2023, let's start with a major new study about sharks along the Central Coast. Lily Dallow, you did some multimedia storytelling on this one. Who did the study and what did it find?
Yeah, so Cal State Long Beach Shark Lab did a 2-year-long study surveying aggregation spots along the Southern California coast for juvenile great white sharks, essentially, and they found 90% of the days served, 97% of the time, there were great white sharks in these two spots with people a lot of the time, in Del Mar, San Diego, and Carpinteria, Santa Claus Beach.
So Jaws stalks Carp is the headline that you wanted to put on that story.
It is. I did want to include something with Jaws on social media, but that got shut down. So I went with Baby Shark because that's one everybody loves.
Yeah, you don't want to scare away the tourist. I think that was the lesson of that whole movie. So what does that mean? Is there clear and present danger to people that are swimming and surfing off of carp or
no, actually not at all. So what I found the most interesting part of that whole study is that most of the time people didn't even know that there were sharks. I think the closest they surveyed them to shore was about 3 yards, but usually they hang back around 50 yards, I believe. And most of the time people didn't even see them. They say that they do their own thing. Humans can do their own thing near the shore. They advise against going after them because that could change their behavior if they think it's a threat. But most of the time it's perfectly safe and they're just off doing their own thing. They're in these areas, like I said earlier, about 97% of the time. And a lot of the photos and videos that they sent to us in the press kit, the Shark Lab, you can see a lot of surfers and paddleboarders kind of, some of them will veer off and follow. If they see the fin, they'll kind of go up to them. There was this one picture where it looks like it's a dad and 2 kids and he's kind of going like this, like, don't go near the shark. But one of the videos that I found funny is it looks a little bit like Jaws. Like there were a lot of people near the coastline. It was a bunch of surfers, and you see in the video that there's one shark going, like if they're all here, there's one shark going past them, and one brave soldier decides to start going out that way and everybody else just books it into shore. And you can't hear anything, unfortunately, but in the study they said that a lot of the time they couldn't see them, but the people studying could see them from up above.
All right. And these are primarily juvenile sharks or
yeah. So they're around I think it was about 10 feet, but yeah. So, and I think I'm gonna get the numbers wrong, but they lay between like 2 and somewhere in the double digits, between 10 and 20 or maybe 30 eggs at a time. So there's one picture where I think I counted about 9 juvenile sharks around Santa Claus Beach at one time, just right off that shore. Yeah.
Oh. Josh, I don't mean to alarm you, but it looks like Jaws is behind you right now. Bite your head off. All right. So you
If Jaws is a hitman, it's very possible. So
we can
don't scare me.
all right, so you can see all the video and read about that study and see Lily's multimedia storytelling on the KEYT news website.
Yeah, it's social media.
Check it out, and on social media. Oh, I forgot social media with our vast Twitter population here in Santa Barbara. I think this is it. There's 5 of us right here. That's about as far as it goes. All right, Callie, you've been running around a track lapping Josh with a series of scoops out of the Santa Barbara Unified School District. Let's start with your latest. And I have to say, I felt like I was in a little bit of a time warp as the culture wars visited the school board over a teacher's use of a image that some people found offensive. What is that story?
Yeah, so it started because a Dos Pueblos high school teacher used this image that is called immersion or Piss Christ in her PowerPoint slide in her theory of knowledge class, which is in the school's international baccalaureate program. And a student who actually was not enrolled in the class took issue with the image when he heard it was used in class discussion. And so this image is literally a small plastic crucifix submerged in the artist Andre Serrano's a glass of his own urine. And so the student heard about this and thought it was sacrilegious, offensive, anti-Catholic, brought his concerns up to the school and got law firm involved and his family, and essentially asked the school to discontinue its use of the image or else they would take legal action. And it caused a big stir in the school district community, especially among Christian and Catholic parents.
Yeah, I know we live in a little bubble here, and it takes a while for news to arrive from elsewhere. But this goes back to the 1980s. It's not like this is some new revelation. Who objected? Was this the parents sort of driving the thing? How did the objection surface?
You would think it was the parents who started all of this, but it really was this student who heard about it. And I want to repeat, he was not actually in the class. He heard about it through probably friends or around the school, and then got parents, I assume in like his close circle involved, and then his parents probably told other parents, and that's when it really got kind of blown up. And you saw the outcome of that at the May 23rd school board meeting, where parents were going up and addressing the school board saying that it was offensive, that it was sacrilegious, that it was blasphemous. They were accusing them of religious discrimination because of the use of this image. But the class's instructor said she wasn't using it to offend or harass anyone. And it was originally used to discuss this topic of what is art. But yeah, so a lot of parents took issue with the Son of God being put in a jar of urine and then presented to their children.
Yeah. And
I just
so
want to,
what was the outcome? Go ahead.
Well, I just want to raise this point is obviously people need to chill out and be respectful of art and not make a mountain out of a molehill. But we've seen some of this come up, I think, internationally when some of these Scandinavian countries, I recall there was some art related to the Prophet Muhammad and how people became very outraged. And I would argue that we might have a little more respect for that. And, like if we read that story, we would sort of think like, wow, that's probably really controversial. And we know how strong people take the Prophet Muhammad and depictions of him and, photography and pictures. And you're not even supposed to know what he looks like. And I think if we read that abstractly, we might feel as though, wow, that's a really interesting situation. So I think if we can kind of shift our brain, and if, people who are Christian and Catholic and spiritual, they really believe just as strongly as people who believe that the image of Muhammad should not be desecrated from their perspective. So I think that we need to look at it in context, whereas you and we might sort of think like, come on,
all
this
due
is
respect,
art.
Josh. That's why they invented Catholic schools. Okay, I mean this is a public school. It seems to me to be a very legitimate question in this particular course of what is art. Is this art? It was controversial in 1985 or something.
Yeah, I'm just amazed that all these years later that this artwork that this person created, Andre Serrano, back in the 80s, is still doing exactly what he wanted to bring this conversation up. And if you think about art and the power of art, I mean, that we're still talking about it. There's still stories about it. There's still this people getting upset over it. That's kind of, as an artist, what you want when you create a piece of art. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's kind of what he meant to do in a way, to bring this conversation up. And it kind of speaks to how strong the image is.
Yeah, and it's history. It was made in 1987, and in 1989 is when it first saw a lot of outrage from Christian and Catholic communities. And so the history behind this image is what makes it the perfect example for having that kind of conversation of what is art, and talking about, censorship and that clash between, artistic expression and religious sensitivities and all of that. But it's funny that you brought that up, Josh, because a lot of the parents at the school board meeting were making that same exact point of, if this was a depiction of the Prophet Muhammad, if it had to do with like Islam or other religions, like there would be much more backlash against it. But yeah.
Well, so and ultimately what the school board caved, or the school caved.
Yeah, so the student said he felt that his concerns were initially brushed off by the administration, but the Dos Pueblos principal, Bill Woodard, and the school district did promise to remove the image from course materials, and said that it may still be verbally discussed, but the actual image will no longer be used in the class.
I'm telling you, I mean, I'm sorry, but brief rant here. There is abroad in the land the American version of the Taliban, with all of this religious fervor and fundamentalism and insanity. And it just really bothers me that the public schools are caving into it, as one institution after another does. And Josh, I take your point. I understand being respectful, but you know what? We're not supposed to have a prayer in the schools either. But I suppose that'll be the next thing to fall.
Well, just wait till they get to college. They're going to learn everything. So,
well, and the other thing is, I mean, right? Jacob took this course, right? What did he come home and say, "Oh my God, you should see what they showed us today"? He didn't. What? I mean,
no, he took, this is the theory of knowledge class. Is that right?
Yeah.
Kelly? Yeah. He took that class and never came up in our household.
All right. Ryan, you had a terrific housing yarn that we discussed a little in your absence last week. It's a story about a offbeat couple from LA, a story about cannabis, a story about liposuction, and of course, fat-fueled cars. But most of all, it's a story about housing. Can you break it down for us?
Yeah, like you said, this is all in the context of the housing crisis and the pressures and what that's created, and the openings that this has created. And there's a strict or a severe need for housing, not just in Santa Barbara but in California. And the state has done through that. They've done this housing element, and there's penalties if you're not building the units that you need to build according to the state. So Santa Barbara, we were allocated 8,000 units, and if we didn't figure out how to zone for those 8,000 units before February 15th, it left us open to what's called the builder's remedy, which gives the developers the power to kind of build bigger and also just get a fast pass through our review system, which is usually, you know, very strict. You go through the ABR, you go through these different design boards, and they're very strict about what you can build, how it can be built, how to keep Santa Barbara the way it is. So right now, because we're out of compliance with the housing element, that opened the door for these developers, and kind of like Lily's story, the sharks are circling Santa Barbara. And it
Nice, very nicely done, Brian.
This brings this element that we might not have seen before. Now, they announced this project over there on the Lower Riviera that would be 30 units, and because they're offering 20% of the units at low income, they have the right to build it under the builder's remedy. And so it got me looking into who these developers are, and turns out they have a very controversial past. And you know, it kind of went down the rabbit hole, and it was hard to believe it myself, and that they were kind of very open about, you know, finding out that this guy Craig Martin Smith had a different name, Dr. Craig Allen Bittner, and he ran a liposuction clinic on Rodeo Drive. And then they had the idea to use their patients' extra fat, kind of like Fight Club, but to fuel their at-home Mercedes GL 320 diesel, which they said they got 11 miles to the gallon, which I don't know how much fat they had in their clinic, but 11 miles to the gallon is not really changing the game when it comes to alternative fuels.
But weren't they like taking extra fat from people to use?
That was the allegation. So then it became this whole thing where there was plenty of allegations that women said they were disfigured and they were taking too much fat out of them. And also there was allegations that he was allowing staff to work without a medical license and do medical procedures. Now, he explained it that Stephanie, she had been consulting and running consultations, and that was why he got in trouble and had to give up his license, and she had to agree that she was
when she wasn't becoming the cannabis king down there too.
And then that was after that they moved down to South America for a little bit, and then came back and remerged as Industrial Partners Group, and she became the face of this kind of partners group. That it was 2015. It was around the time when cannabis was on its way to being legalized in California. It was, you could sell it as medicine. So there was a lot of dispensaries and a lot of cannabis producers, and they needed the warehouses to produce it. And she kind of provided them this warehouse, and it's not technically illegal, but some of those, it brought the attention of the law. She kind of, you know, put herself in the news as, you know, we have this big company that's renting out all these warehouses. And eventually they got raided. Their Pacific Palisades home got raided. They found some pain pills there, cash, which were explained. Everything, which was another turn that when I'm researching this story, every turn along the way, they have an explanation for that. It was the pain pills were from
which is why they changed their names.
Yeah, and they changed their names because it was common to both of their families. He said
Smith.
Yeah, Smith. and then they moved to Bali after that. After that, in the marijuana kind of arrests, and no convictions ever came out of that. I want to be clear, they were never convicted of these crimes, but it made me very interested to see. I think people in Santa Barbara care about who they're doing business with and who is kind of
right. Just to circle back, so now they are first in line for builder's remedy, correct?
They were the first project to submit an application, a formal application, and so it's not formally approved as a project. It's not set in stone, but they kind of lock their objective standards in place. And if they get their application all the way approved in this next 6 months, they kind of get that fast pass and they can build this 30-unit development, which will likely happen.
Hey, Josh, you know everything about city regulations. Is there any kind of clause anywhere that goes to the, shall we say, background of people who are developing projects that, you know, might raise questions about the wisdom of approving their projects?
We're not going to build anything if we have a morality clause and who submits applications, and we're not going to build anything.
Another part of that conversation.
See, I'm arguing the other side, exactly.
You know, this is, I am very much of the opinion, this is kind of where I'm torn on this. This is America, and people who have gotten arrested, have gotten DUIs, have gotten through any problems, they can build themselves up. But it's still, I thought it should be out there that there's this kind of background.
Yeah, but wait a minute.
More than just an arrest or a DUI or something like
Among
that.
the other things that we haven't had time to mention is that they've also been in bankruptcy. So
Multiple
we're going to
bankruptcies.
dig a big hole in the ground on the Riviera, and then all of a sudden they're financing. They don't even have any financing, right? They're self-financing it.
They're self-financed, which is something that I was really trying to get answers from them. You know, that after filing bankruptcy, only in a couple of years to be able to build yourself up to a point where you're leasing $2 million worth of warehouses and properties around California, and you're buying up $1 million properties. And because this isn't their only builder's remedy project they're applying for, he told me they have several across the state.
I'm sure they do.
Half or 43% of our state is out of compliance right now, which is a big problem.
Yeah, well, hey Lily, I'm telling you, you got to do multimedia, social media reporting on this one. You got everything. You got pot, you got cannabis, you got people changing their name to Smith, for God's sake. I mean, that's the tip off, isn't it? Josh, is this thing going to go through, do you think?
No, I mean, I think that builder's remedy is scary, but the city of Santa Barbara is more scary. They essentially, you lock in the development standards at the time. Okay, great. But just like we saw with La Cumbre Plaza, the city can deem their application incomplete by finding anything wrong with it in terms of whatever this applicant has not studied, whether that's traffic impacts, public infrastructure impacts, and it slows the process down. So once they deem their application is good to go, well, yes, then it's like a 5 meeting maximum, but this is not going to work. I mean, the city is going to figure out a way to slow this project
down. The city
down.
can find out that this development does not fit within the general plan, and that is kind of how the wording is pretty vague. If they can find something that doesn't fit within the city's general plan, they can deny the application.
Yeah. Well, Callie and Lily, you both talked on previous shows about, you know, how hard it is to find housing and pay for housing as a young person trying to make it in this town, and you know, coming back to where you were born and raised. Would you rent a place from the liposuction couple? I'm just curious, Lily.
I would be curious to see what the power runs on there. So yeah, I don't know.
They ran up their warehouse rent a $67,000 bill with Southern California Edison. So that kind of shows.
Callie, how do you balance your desire to see more and cheaper housing built in Santa Barbara with just handing the keys to any weirdos who walk into town?
That's kind of the conversation right now, and you know, I'm conflicted as well, because I also struggle to find affordable housing, as a lot of people do in Santa Barbara, and we need housing. The state needs housing. You can argue all day about, you know, oh, the state setting these allocations is just putting us in a bad spot, but these buildings are not going to get. We expect private developers to build these buildings, but they're not going to be built without them getting something out of it, which is kind of where we are right now. So unless we change that or really, really support public housing, it's going to be in this position where we're relying on private developers to give us 20% here, 10% there.
Callie, Ryan's obviously sold his soul to the developers. What are your thoughts on this one?
Honestly, I'm starting to look for apartments right now, actually, because I'm getting ready to move out of my house. And I would honestly rent from a whack job any day if they're not charging me like obscene amounts for rent every month, like I've seen on some of the apartment listings in Santa Barbara. So as long as they're not serial killers, like I think I would go for it.
That's the bar.
All right, no serial killers need apply. Okay, Josh.
I say build it all in Montecito. Just stay away from the Glen Annie Golf Club and DP High School. That's only my rule.
There you go. There you go. All right, Josh. Our future mayor, Kristen Sneddon, and I want to make it clear we're not talking about the second term of Randy Rouse, much deserved, as he objected to my framing of that phrase last week. She got pretty heated about the budget process going on, which is usually kind of a snoozer, no offense, but that was unusual. What's her beef?
This budget hearing, this was so exciting. This was like watching a Quentin Tarantino movie. This was so good. Kristen Sneddon emerged as a political player with this discussion. She came out of her shell and she basically said, I think Rebecca Bjork, city administrator, Keith DeMartini, finance director, I think your projections are too conservative. I think that you are being too conservative with how much revenue you think we're going to take in. And hey, city, you want every department to cut 5%? No, we're not going to do that. We can't have this uniform thing. Here's the deal. The Parks and Recreation director wanted to cut a Monroe after-school program to save $63,000. Monroe is 71% Latino. She said they can walk to Washington. Think about that. Or she said Santa Barbara Unified School District has a separate AOK program and they can just use that program. Well, Santa Barbara Unified School District told me, Ed Kelly, no, we don't have capacity for that. Parks and Rec, libraries were cut back before COVID or when COVID hit, and they've been closed 2 days a week and then 1 day a week. And so all these budget discussions, and Kristen Sneddon just basically said, no, we're not going to do this. This is wrong. You're being too logical, financial based. We're the council. We need to figure out another way.
Well, she accused them of not being transparent about what was going on, right? I mean,
yes, she wasn't saying they were like cheating or lying or doing anything like that. She's saying that they were sort of keeping the information to themselves and not wanting to share it with the council. And in this really compelling moment, Rebecca Bjork,
she was right.
She was right. Rebecca Bjork says, oh, council, this is a very difficult thing to understand. And Kristen Sneddon interjected. She said, no, it is not complicated. It is not difficult. It's not transparent. And that kind of silenced everybody in the room. So here's what happened. Because of Kristen Sneddon pushing the agenda, the council is going to not use Measure C funds, which is what Kristen originally wanted, but that got a big backlash from a lot of people in the community. Then enter Megan Harmon, who says, let's dip into the reserves by 2 to 5% and pay for it through that way. And then once we actually see what our revenues are, maybe it'll be a little bit less. So Kristen pushed the agenda to figure out a way to spare these programs. And Megan Harmon sort of found the funding mechanism, and it all came together. There was more than 100 people at this budget.
Well, how much did they take out of the reserves in the end?
They ended up taking about, let's see,
There's a couple.
About $1 million. What's that?
About $1 million?
Yeah, and they ended up taking that, but they don't really know how much it's going to be yet. It's going to be based off of, well, what are our revenues going to come in? And so if their estimates are low, they're hoping that it's going to be a little bit higher and it won't actually be anything. So that's kind of where it was at. But Eric Friedman talking about a mayor's race, Kristen Sneddon, there's some
Megan
conversation about these two wanting to run for mayor after Randy decides that he doesn't want to run, or after he gets elected to a second term. And that may be the battle. Eric, by the way, was opposite of Kristen every step of the way.
Well, he's been kind of the budget guy, right? I mean, that's sort of what his calling card is.
Yeah, he's the chair of the finance committee, and they have looked at all of this stuff. And so that was what was playing out as the background subject.
But he didn't vote against taking the money out of the reserves, right? That was unanimous?
Yes, he sort of agreed, but Measure C was sort of the untouchable thing because that was a 1 cent sales tax. for infrastructure, although it is a general tax, but it was sold on the idea that it was streets, roads.
What I liked hearing was Bendy White come in and give some comment to there. I've been watching also there's been over 44 hours of deliberations that, you know,
Bendy showed up?
Bendy showed up at Wednesdays, and he gave a really good comment of there's been a little bit of doom and gloom that we expect $1 million deficit in 24, 4 million in 25. But if you look in the past 5-10 years, our general fund has been in a surplus, and, you know, over 5 years, I think it's 70 million plus. So there's been this, you know, we see a little bit of deficit coming up, and there was a lot in this discussion of we need to cut now, we need to tighten up our belts. And Bendy kind of gave some context, and he said, you know, the sun will come out again, and our revenues will return. And I think that's a good way to kind of frame these discussions, especially with Kristen pointing out, you know, these estimates were very conservative, and we probably will get more revenues than, and that's kind of what the finance department does want. So there's been a lot of discussions around.
Well, future Mayor Megan Harmon also
got 3 now.
and you're always egging her on with this kind of stuff, but she says we need to have a holistic conversation about all of this, whatever the hell that means. But I actually emailed with her a little bit about it. So she's saying it's kind of a cheesy move to just every time you need some money, take it out of the reserves. That's not really what the reserves are for. And so she thinks we have too much of a reserve, and that we ought to, you know, develop some sort of clearer policies about how to use it, which isn't a bad idea, actually.
I mean, what's the point of the money sitting when we have libraries, when we have parks and recreation?
Well, it's an emergency fund. I mean, who knew there was going to be a mudslide?
Like people were pointing out, I think that's a better choice than Measure C, which, like Josh and a lot of people were saying, is for infrastructure, not for, you know, processes or other programs. And, you know, if they wanted to use Measure C to renovate a park, that's something. But if you wanted to use it to pay workers and move salaries over there, that's kind of not what it was meant to be.
All right. I want to do a real quick lightning round, just real quick. Lily, where are we with the Ernestine Story, the first Chumash Grand Marshal of Fiesta? Have you talked to her?
Yeah, Josh and I spent about an hour and a half, I want to say, with her at the Rose Gardens. That was a wild ride.
we can't repeat most of what she said. Sorry.
Yeah.
So when are we going to see that piece? When is that piece coming?
Hopefully in the next week. We spent some time with her, and then I went and I spent some time with the anthropologist that she's been working with since the 80s, I believe. John Johnson, who works at the museum. And I met him at the Painted Cave, which was just like the perfect spot to talk about everything. It's coming together really nicely. It was cool to see. I was going through John's interview. I finished it up yesterday, just going through and pulling out some of my favorite quotes. And it's so cool to see, like, they didn't know what the other person had said. And there were a few times where they were saying the same exact thing. Like,
Wow.
For example, my favorite moment was Ernestine was talking about when she met John, and she said, he'll call me a hippie. I was wearing these overalls, but he's the one who's the hippie. And then when he was talking about meeting her, he was like, she was wearing these overalls. She totally looked like a hippie. And I was like, she said the same thing. So it was really sweet to see, you know, what 40 years of working side by side does to a duo like that. And then, you know, of course, learning about Ernestine's colorful life. So I've been really enjoying the process, and I'm excited to see the.
All right, look for that. And then Callie, I mentioned earlier you had several, I think, very important stories out of the school board. Real quick, cleaning up the mess that the previous superintendent, or continuing to clean up the mess the previous superintendent, Hilda Maldonado, and the school district paid, what, $950,000, $1 million, something like that, to the victim of a sex abuse case perpetrated by a former teacher. Yes.
Yeah. So it was a civil case. and it came out of a 2017 battery case by a teacher named Matef Marmakis, who I actually, fun fact, had when I was a student at Santa Barbara
No
High
way.
School. Yeah, yes. And so
Was he creepy?
he honestly, he never came across as creepy to me. He never was directly
Yeah, he wouldn't
creepy, never
dare. He
seemed
wouldn't dare with
creepy.
you. That's why.
But yeah, like I've said this a million times, like it just because it didn't happen to me doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, it came out of a 2017 battery case against this student who's named as Jane Doe in the case. And essentially they said that the district was negligent, and that Matef Hermakis has like this very long history of, I guess, just being like troublemaking, I guess, in the school district by there were multiple different issues over the years, and they
couldn't
said
get rid of him.
they essentially couldn't keep him out of the classroom. He
You
was
can't
on
fire a
administrative.
teacher in California.
Yeah, he was on administrative leave for I think a total of like 9 or 10 years throughout his time in the district. Yeah, paid leave, and then he comes back, and then it's okay for a while. And this battery case happens in 2017. He officially loses his teaching credential and is officially fired by the district. And now Jane Doe and her lawyers are suing over what they say is a sexual abuse lawsuit, as well as negligence on the behalf of the district for letting Matef Hermakis back into the classroom.
Yeah. Okay. So but it's settled. And then
Yeah.
real quick, the teachers ended up getting a raise, huh? Even though the
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even though the district had said, oh, we're not going back to the bargaining table until we renegotiate contracts anew in the 2024 to 2025 school year, they voted a few weeks ago to give teachers a 4% raise next year. That's adding on to the 2% they were already guaranteed through their previous contract, as well as a $1,000 bonus sometime later this year.
Yeah, I wonder if they went into the reserve fund for that. I'll bet they did. Ryan, we talked a couple of weeks ago about these 6 restaurants that were having problems with their parklets, and the city wanted to shut them down, and they objected, and they got shut down, huh?
Yeah, well, if you don't get yourself in compliance in time, they kind of gave them a date. They sent multiple notices. You can argue that, it got lost in the messaging. There was confusion that they said, and you could say that there was only a half-inch gap. But, if you're a business and everybody else was able to get in compliance, that they gave them ample time, and they did argue their point in council. But yeah, all 6 of them had to remove them.
So they deconstructed them and hauled them away, and
yeah, I think some of them tried to sell the pieces of them. Yeah, but they just were ordered to take them down.
Yeah. Josh, what do you think the chances are that all the parklets are going to be gone by the end of the year?
Well, my sources say that's the internal behind the scenes goal, is to have everything gone by the end of the year when the emergency ordinance expires. So I don't know. I know that's well, I shouldn't say that's Randy's goal, because we'll get an email in an hour saying it's not, but some people say that may be the natural way that this progresses.
Well, that
So-
would sure eliminate a headache with all this State Street planning, because we could start from square one. All right, who you got in the podcast, Josh?
I want to say one thing about Hilda Maldonado, Jerry, is that my son graduated from Dos Pueblos last night.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Good for you, Jacob.
Hilda Maldonado was at the DP ceremony, along with board member Virginia Alvarez. And about an hour after I got home, I get this text message from Hilda. And she says, congrats to Jacob. And she's got 2 photos. And she took 2 photos. The superintendent, as Jacob is getting his diploma walking on stage. It's like, these are the best photos ever. So that was kind of cool on her
I was
part.
going to ask why the superintendent ended up at DP instead of Santa Barbara High or San Marcos, but now I know why.
Hey,
She was
even the
talking up
families
you.
who live in Santa Barbara take their kids to DP. So anyway, that was that. I have council member Oscar Gutierrez on the podcast coming up. I have not recorded it yet, but we're going to talk about the budget and State Street and all the stuff.
How many more years does Oscar having his term? 13, 14, something like that?
2006. So whatever that is, what, 3 more years? Yeah. So
Okay. All right. 2026. All right. Lily Dallow, Josh Molina, Callie Fausey, and Ryan P. Cruz. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for watching. And we will see you next time on Newsmakers.